paper real quick.
Yeah.
1 second. 1 second. Okay, so what I did for my second data collection, and it's, the paper is done. I'm still continuing with it now though, so the program's not done, but basically what I used a task analysis and a script fading procedure to increase conversational skills with one student. So I'm just kind of like looking through, basically this student is transitioning to high school next year. And so, you know, the social skills aspect was kind of like priority for me when I was thinking like, what last big thing can I give him this semester? So my class is in a self-contained setting. I've thought this was a really important thing to do with this student because one, my class is of 4 students, that's it, except as of this week now 5, but still it's a really small class. Next year he will not just be in the same room all day. Their program's a little different. They have a different room for kind of like transition and life skills, and so there will be more transitions, and it's also, he's going from a class of 4 students to a self-contained class of 16 students as of now, so it's a big change for him. And we're just real quick, I want to just give an example of, well, I'll go ahead and talk about some of the literature I did, and then I'll get into kind of where he was prior to the treatment. But one of the articles that I used was from, was using so I kind of had different articles. Some were just focused on script fading, and then some were just focused on the task analysis. But since I used both of those procedures, I got articles about both. So some of them was from Howlett, I don't know if I'm saying this last name right, Seidener, Progar, and Seidener. And they used a script fading procedure on the acquisition of the man wears this object, like insert object name. And so I used that article. There was also another article about using a task analysis with 3 adults with autism, and it was using the computer, like accessing websites using a task analysis based on their interests. I used this, now this one was
really quick, hang on, and this is something that for this first round, I'm probably going to be interjecting more, so that I can give you guys learning it's directly on the behavior, and you can have that opportunity to make that correction right away.
Okay.
So as you're talking through those pieces of literature, don't just let us know what it was. Tell us a little bit about it. Tell us kind of what they did, if it was impactful one way or another, and why it's important vis-a-vis your study. So what was their purpose? How successful was it? And or what the results showed, and then what's the takeaway as it relates to what you're doing? Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, that's okay. So that's thank you for that. And I'll go into this article as it was very similar results showed from mine and theirs with Krantz and McClanahan, and they used a script fading procedure to teach peer initiations with 4 children with autism, which was what I was doing as well, you know, using these procedures to for these peer initiations, yes. So and the results from that study showed that scripted peer initiations increased as well as unscripted initiations. And they observed generalization across multiple settings in that school and with multiple teachers. And this showed across all 4 participants. And the results from my study, at least thus far, has shown very similar results. And sorry, I'm like going through the paper now. And so, where is this one? Okay, there was a task now. I just lost my spot. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, and then also in Gillis, Wichnick, and Veneer and Paulson. For someone with a really hard last name, I'm not good with last names. But yeah, so they also used a script fading package for initiating social interactions during school settings across 3 participants between the ages of 8 and 10 years old. So participants were younger, but similar program. And they said in their baseline, the participants were able to initiate some interactions, but it was pretty kind of just spontaneous. It wasn't very consistent, but the skill was there, just wasn't very consistent, just kind of random, really. So when they implemented the script fading procedure, kind of like the last study I just explained, there were scripted interactions increased along with unscripted. And then their generalization program, though, was conducted, which I kind of thought this was cool. They did it in a home setting rather than at school with their siblings, which maybe, when I was first thinking it, I was thinking, maybe they would be more comfortable with their siblings anyway, but also it's an untrained setting. So I thought that was really interesting. And so in my study, similarly to this, I also noticed generalization occurring across multiple adults. So where I know they did their generalization with siblings, other children, mine so far have just been with adults, but I have seen that generalization occur. So basically my participant is 15 years old, and he has a diagnosis of intellectual disability moderate. He receives all his instruction in my classroom. He's with me all day long except for 45-minute class sessions where he is in PE or once a week for speech, but pretty much he's with me all day. So I used the task analysis for his physical orientation when he's talking to someone. And I'll give you an example. If his back is to me and or if he's facing this way and I'm walking in from this side, and I would be like, hey, how's your morning going? His back would literally be to me and he would say, it's fine. So he's not even looking. He's not even directed at me at all, but he's still answering the question. He's answering it very quietly. Most people that aren't used to being around him, probably wouldn't even have heard, I just know to listen for that. So we did the task analysis for the appropriate physical orientation, which consisted of, are your shoulders facing the person? Is your head facing the person? And appropriate, I put in my paper, eye contact or eye gaze. I'm not a huge fan of, and this is just me personally, but I'm not a huge fan of, forcing eye contact, at least right away, because that, eye contact can be very uncomfortable for some people. And, but as long as the eye gaze is in the general direction of the person that he's speaking with, like that was fine to me. But I don't know if you agree or not, but that's just my thoughts on it.
I'll talk to that afterwards. But that's
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so the turning the shoulders, and then turning your head facing the person, either left or right. Also, oh, I forgot this step, elevating the head to an appropriate level. Do you need to turn your head up or down? In some instances, he had to elevate his head up because the person he was speaking with was taller than him. But when he's talking to me, he kind of has to elevate down because he's really tall. So we did that, and then the appropriate eye contact or eye gaze. And then, so that was for the task analysis, and the script fading procedure involved the teacher and student creating and writing a script. And I hope I worded this correctly. I wasn't sure exactly how, but a minimum of a 4-cycle conversation, someone initiates, someone responds, someone initiates, someone responds. So a minimum of that. And when we started writing the scripts, we really did just kind of stop at 4, and then just to practice. Then we'd add on in other scripts. And we did these for various conversational topics, and then we would read the script together. I would point to the script and he can read, and I would have him read it, and we practice it that way. So my neighbor is cutting his grass right now. I hope it's not too distracting, but anyway, so that was the procedure for that. And do you want me to go through the whole paper? Or do you want me to go ahead and show my graphs?
Yeah, go ahead and show. Yeah, let's start with that, because I think that will be able to help us get to.
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to get that background first before I explain all the results. I'd rather you just see it. So
talk specifically now at this point, as you're sharing your graph, try to talk specifically about independent variable, dependent variable, design, whether there is one or not. That's what we'll talk about. And then baseline, intervention, really use the graph as a prompt to really give a robust talk through your methods and your results, like your specific methods and your results. Okay.
And I will say before I pull this up, I mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm really not the best with the experimental design yet. I really struggle there, honestly. But I did say that it was a multiple probe design. We started out with the baseline probes, and then our intervention phase, and then we did the post-treatment probes, and then a generalization probes after that. So maybe it's right, maybe it's not. But anyway, so okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this is how the graph looked. I'm going to explain the percentages in a second too, but this is how it's looked. Please ignore that last data point on session 15. I have not done it yet, but when I put the formula in the Excel cell, it is doing that until I put some kind of data in there. But it really stops at session 14. So anyway, okay, here's how I collected my data. Actually, I collected it on a really messy piece of paper and put it into this. So through, can y'all see my mouse moving on here? Okay, cool. So on March 2nd is when we started it, through March 8th. And so this is a total, you can see, of 3 days for baseline, but I did a probe in the morning and in the afternoon. And I'll explain this. So this 1, 2, 3, 4 was his the different, his different responses. His first response to the person he was speaking with, his second, his third, his fourth. Anyway, so if you can see on the right side, well, you see I have the trial average incorrect and the trial average correct. So right here where you see the letters, that's like his shoulder orientation, where it says average shoulder orientation, average head orientation, eye, this average volume of his voice, and then over on the side, there's tone of voice. So you can see in baseline, the trial average correct was, well, for head orientation, it wasn't too bad, 71%. He kind of got that pretty quick, but you can see he would still, you know, the shoulders 38, eyes 29, volume and tone issue, that's kind of an issue where he struggles the most, 8% and 21%. So I conducted, and I think it's important to see this too, because there's some areas where, you know, he did really well throughout, and you can kind of see which areas are holding him back. So this was all during baseline. And then I implemented the treatment that I discussed, the task analysis, the script fading. And so during baseline, he had those interactions with the same adult, but not an adult that he's very familiar with seeing a lot. He knew the adult, but not very well. It was one of our administrators that would come in and helped me with this. And so after the treatment, on March 18th, she came back, and you can see, you know, he went from, you know, up here with 65, 60, 70% incorrect. Now he's down to 20%, 10%. So, and you can see his average correct went up to 80 and 90%, which was really awesome. So we saw the most success with his shoulder and head orientation, his eye gaze, but in the volume and the voice, he did better. He did a lot better with that. He rose significantly. So we did that for 3 days again, but just one. We just were able to do one of those post-treatment probes per day instead of the two like we did in baseline. And then on the 23rd, I started a generalization probe. I'm going to tell you now, I don't think I did it right, but I'm correcting it now. So I had a different adult come in, which I, you know, thought was right, and I still think that part's right. But then I had him continue to come in on the other days. I think I should have had different people come in each of those days. I don't know. But I saw very like positive results. Still, you can still see his lowest areas are still the volume and tone. I don't know, Dr. Shaman, do you think I should have done a different adult each day?
It depends on what you're really going for. So I think that when you're talking about this type of behavior, I would think that novelty of the adult is going to be a variable. If that's your target variable for generalization, then yes, you want a new adult every single time, right? Because you're basically you only have one opportunity for collecting data with a new adult, and that's the first time they see the adult. As soon as they see the adult, then they establish an instructional history or a little bit of instructional history, and they have that experience.
Personally, I was thinking like it would have been better to have a different adult each day, just, you know, because you're not going to talk to the same people every day necessarily. Right. And so after that, when I was like, oh no, is this a mistake? I started, and I did this past Friday and Monday of this week, I started doing novel probes with I had two teachers come in, and he did not know them. So you can see he still scored 80% correct on the first one, 75 on the one Monday, which I don't think is, too terrible of a drop, but I mean, it is a drop. And you can see that right here, it's kind of going down a little bit, but again, ignore that last data point. But yeah, so it is, so we're still conducting those. So I've been yesterday and today, I've been doing some kind of reteaching and then also really kind of focusing on practice with that volume and tone, since that's where he's kind of been scoring the lowest. And then tomorrow, yesterday I did the novel probe. Today and tomorrow I do the reteaching. And then Thursday I'm going to conduct another probe, because that'll be the last day of school before our spring break. And we'll see how he does with that. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And some of my next steps would be to conduct the probes kind of as a maintenance probe. He's not going to have any kind of teaching for the next week and a half because of spring break. So I thought coming back from that would be a good time to conduct a maintenance probe. And then, of course, I'd like to continue it with peers, since I've only done adults so far. So that's where we are now.
Awesome. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. Really, really nice job. Yeah. Really quick, I want you to, but before you sign off, okay. In terms of your analysis and your discussion, you provided a good analysis. You're talking about what you want to do next, testing with peers, further generalization maintenance. Talk about the limitations that you encountered in this study. So when we talk about what to do next, there's new data that we're interested in, but there's also, we always make mistakes in our research, and part of our next research is fixing those mistakes. So what are some things, and we refer to them as limitations. Yes. So what are some of the limitations that you encountered in this study?
One limitation, there were some odd days where, there was a week where I was sick and he was sick and our schedule was very off. There was a lot of absences between the two of us. And so that kind of, it limited the time as far as the actual paper had to go. But as far as, but really the limitation with that is just he wasn't getting that consistent teaching that week. And so it just, of course, that's going to throw you off a little bit. Another limitation, and I think this is because I'm, as someone still learning about AV8, I'm not here yet. And I know that this is something we'll learn eventually, but I really am clueless when it comes to inter-observer agreement. And I would have liked to kind of have that with my supervisor or something. My supervisor isn't here every day anyway, but maybe that would have been a cool component to incorporate, but I think I need some more experience practicing that first. Those were some limitations. Part of me wonders if maybe another limitation was conducting the whole thing in my classroom. I know I had some other people come to have the conversations with him, so it was generalized across multiple people, but I haven't yet practiced it outside of the classroom, and which also I'd like to include in my next steps as well, because part of me thinks, well, of course it's going to be easier for him. He spends all day in that room. Even if he doesn't know the person, at least he's in a setting that he's already very comfortable. But the point of this is to get him out of his comfort zone, and next year he's not going to necessarily be comfortable right away. He's going to be in a whole new school. So just maybe some better generalization in the future.
Awesome. Very nice. Yeah. Well done. Okay. Before I say anything before I comment and critique, what do you guys have anything that you want to say?
Yeah, so sure. Thank you, Lauren. That was good. Actually, it's helping me um, as well, with some terminology and almost even direction, not the same thing that you're doing, but putting it in that framework, I guess. So that was very helpful. But I did have, so how did you do generalization? You said generalization did occur. How was that? Who, with whom and how?
Oh, okay. So, maybe I didn't say that. I'm sorry. But so so for my post probes, I had that same adult, that administrator come in, from baseline, but, I just had, a different adult, come in and like have a conversation, with that student. And then, but it wasn't for generalization. I did, not someone he was very familiar with, or I don't actually, for the generalization probes, he's definitely seen that individual before, but, never really had too much of a conversation besides maybe a passing hello. But so I just kind of I was literally in the hallway that morning and was like, hey, you're on duty this morning. There you are. Do you want to help me with something? So it wasn't like a super planned thing, but I just needed someone he wasn't very familiar with to come, and do those probes. And then same for like when I kind of freaked out and was like, should I not have done the same person for every generalization probe? That's when I started, on Friday, like just pulling in doing the novel probes, and those people he really did not know. They were like my coworker friends. He doesn't know them though. So that's how that was conducted. It was pretty much just, do you want to come hang out with a cool kid for 5 minutes? So
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Lauren. So
Awesome. Thank you, Cece. Any other questions, comments? Anything.
oh, one thing I did want to add too, and I didn't mark it on that data sheet, but I just want to note, I did put it in my paper. It was just something cool in, all of the baseline probes. The adult, had to initiate. I would tell them like, come in, but don't immediately start talking to him. See if he like interacts with you first. And if after like 10, 15 seconds he doesn't, then go ahead and start. Well, he did not initiate any conversations in baseline. He initiated every single one post treatment. So I just thought that was a cool thing to add.
That's huge. Well, I'll still wait. Anyone else want to say anything? Comment? Questions? Feedback? You guys are so shy. You're such a small group.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna try to talk.
Yeah.
The definitions of the tone and volume that you used, how were you getting the percentages? Like, was it out of a certain amount of points, or did you have a scale? I saw you finished.
It was really just that part is a little vague too, and I was trying to like run with that with my BCBA. I was mostly just basing off of what I know about the student. When he the volume is, it was like, can I hear you? Like he speaks it's like basically like a whisper. And so if I could see him making the effort and I can hear him and like he's speaking at just like a normal tone, like I am talking to all of you right now, I would mark that as correct. If I have to be like, what did you say? That would not be. And then with tone, it's more just like not sounding like this all the time, like very robotic, and we kind of, and so I guess, yeah, that part might have been a limitation as well, now that you mention it, because there wasn't really an exact definition for it. It was mostly just me knowing the student, knowing what he's capable of and like where he is at right now. But it was mostly trying to just kind of get him out of that robotic tone that he talks in when he's nervous, and just having him speak up some so that the other person can hear him. But no, there wasn't like a scale or really anything for that.
All right, good question. Anything else? All right, awesome job, Lauren. That was a really, really, really good first presentation. And Cece, to kind of what you said, not in terms of the question that you asked, but in terms of why that was helpful, that's exactly why we need to start these presentations. It's one thing when I am talking to you guys or Dr. G is talking to you guys. It's totally another when you guys are talking to each other and hearing how you as a group are talking, are using the verbal behavior, hearing our feedback to you guys. Like this is your biggest observational learning opportunity in this class, right? This is your opportunity to not compare yourself to others or measure yourself to others, but get some sense on what you need to work on, what you need to target, what you want to try and say when you're speaking. You guys just haven't had a lot of those opportunities yet. You have more in Dr. Cohen's class, but this is a meatier content area and an opportunity for you guys to put it all together. So Lauren, I really, really appreciate you taking that step. Everyone else, you're going to do it at some point, I promise you. So drink your bravery juice and we'll get it done. Taylor, do you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's in relation to Lauren's project, but also one kind of as a whole for anybody to answer. I'm also working on a volume program as one of my data collections, and I'm in the same boat as Lauren in a sense where I know what to look for because I'm mainly the person working with the client, but like how to operationally define that volume, because it's it's so weird to give a definition to appropriate volume or appropriate speech. It's not as clean cut.
Taking data on the volume and the tone helped, honestly, it helped me a lot, just at me personally, like maybe just me, because they would help me know what to look for and collect data on that. So like as a student, it was helpful, but I don't know, I'll be completely honest too, like I don't know how to operationally define that. And I'm sure there's a better way. So yeah, Taylor, like we're definitely in the same boat. So if anyone has suggestions on volume,
because like
that would be, because it really, yeah.
Oh, yeah, like for me, what happens, I know you say you have like a self-contained classroom. I'm a line tech working with a client. So there might be days where I'm pulled from her to fill in somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happened the past 3 days. So not only are sometimes her data, when it is being run, the data is highly variable, is nowhere near consistent from what I have been collecting. If that's not occurring, sometimes they're just not running it because it's not defined well enough, which that's on me, but it's like how to define this appropriate volume.
Yeah, and I think that the appropriate volume and tone is so important, and it's an issue that I've seen a lot with a lot of my students with autism, but I know when they're making progress, and I see when, they've accomplished this, and I know that they have this skill now, but if I'm gonna put it like into the data, like I don't know how, but I still wanted to point that out, like on my data that y'all saw, like those correct responses, those were what I considered correct, but when you ask for a definition, that's hard for me too.
Well, yeah. Oh yeah, look, I see Kayla, and I was thinking along the same line. I know some teachers are in some elementary schools. It's not new, and I'm sure many of y'all are familiar, but they'll help students learn procedure by, this is the space where we whisper voice or inside voice or outside voice, or maybe those are ways to measure. I'm not sure, but I was just throwing that out there. So
Yeah, I think that, well, yeah, like using like the inside voice and stuff like that, like I'm not sure my student can necessarily differentiate that right now. So, yeah.
Similarly, what I keep catching myself falling into, because it's terminology just used not within like just the clinic, but like the school terminology, is using a green voice. But I'm like, how did we give sound a color definition? And how do I expect her to understand what green voice in itself means? And then there are times where like she'll emit this vocal imitation of like her classmate moaning, and the correction to that has been quiet voice. So I'm like, we have green voice on one hand and quiet voice on the other side. And I'm like, what? I need to clean this up ASAP. And I'm stuck on how to define this.
Well, as far as that goes, and someone like tell me like you're the worst teacher for this, but like my school has like similar things with the not necessarily green voice, but like similar to that. And like I just think it as like, you know, my students are with me all day. We're not gonna do that. but you know, there's ways I think that you can, once they learn, if you're teaching quiet voice, you know, then maybe there's a way for you to transfer that and make it like this is the same thing as green voice or whatever. I don't know. But like as far as those terms go, I just do what makes sense for each individual student. And I don't know if maybe my administrators wouldn't like that, but like my students aren't going to understand green is a color. And now you want me to talk like green? Like,
yes, that's the problem. Because like around the school, there'll be volume charts where it says like blue is too low, and she's not a reader, so it's just a chart, a color chart to her. So if she's whispering and we're like, oh, that's a blue voice, we need to be a green voice. What is green? Or if she actually occasionally she will yell and it's like, that's a red voice. What does that mean? For me, I know, but what does that mean for her? And I see Dr. Shaman laughing.
Yeah, our brains are like the same right now, Taylor. I'm like in the same boat. All right, Dr. Shaman.
First of all, I love when I don't have to say anything, and you guys can go back and forth, and I enjoy, but two, I appreciate, and I appreciate how you guys are engaging with that content, and you're really starting to think both critically and practically in a lot of different ways. And I think when Lauren, when I was looking through your list and how you had the percentages, and Heather, I thought it was a great question and a really good follow-up. But that type of operational definition is, and understanding what goes into that is really important. And rest easy or toss and turn it at night knowing that there isn't a good answer to it. So let's talk about that for a minute. How can we operationally define something like volume or tone or some of these other behaviors that are clearly a behavior that live in gray areas? And I have two ways that I'm thinking of, and I want to see if you guys can arrive at them. Not specific definitions, but two ways that we can look at it. What do you guys think? What is one very clear way that we could define something like volume?
A scream versus a whisper.
Okay, and that would be measured how?
Sound.
like scientifically measured how? Kayla, what's your answer? Turn your microphone on and say it.
Decibels?
Yep, exactly. So decibels would be the specific way to measure volume, right? now, as you guys are talking about what, like the ability for a kid to understand that, the practicality of that. Taylor's saying she can't have a phone that has a decibel reader because of HIPAA concerns. There are concerns with that. What's another way? So what I would call that is a formal definition. All right, it's based on the formal characteristics of the behavior, or we don't have a shape for sound, but we have decibels. We have a static measure of the behavior. So that's one way, formal characteristics. But there's another way that we could measure something like that. It also starts with an F. We have formal and what?
Functional?
Functional. Awesome,
Okay.
Taylor. Nice job. So what would a functional definition of volume be?
Would that be like if it's appropriate for the setting?
Yeah.
So like if you're working one-on-one in a class, it would be more like how we're speaking now. But if you're outside, yelling and all that would be more acceptable.
Exactly. Awesome. Lauren, how would that work for, how might you define functional for your kid? In greeting, when you're targeting one specific
Him
setting.
speaking in my classroom, like that's yeah, okay, I guess. And I wasn't even thinking of that too. I was like, how do you like define this? But I mean, you have to, I guess, say what specific setting you're in. I don't know. I don't know how to define it. I know what I want out of him. I just don't know how to say it.
So let's think about this. If I have a child who is in a room where I'm looking at this greeting behavior, and I don't want to use formal characteristics, I want to use functional characteristics. How could I specifically operationally define volume in terms of function for a greeting? And I know that's a mouthful. Let me say it again. How can I define volume in terms of function specifically for a greeting?
I guess first of all, I don't know, but here is what I'm thinking. I just, for that specific student, I would want him to greet the other person in a manner where he can be heard. Like, just because for him, he's not usually heard, he whispers it, and I'm like, hey, he didn't hear what you said. Say it again. Say it louder. So
that's it. That's the answer. That's okay. The answer, right? That is a functional definition.
It just doesn't feel like enough,
Right. Absolutely. It's a functional definition though of the behavior, right? I am measuring the behavior based on how it affects a listener. If my listener can hear them, it's appropriate, and it can be reinforced by response. If they can't, then you need a prompt. The listener would have to say, "What'd you say? I couldn't hear you." There would be a natural consequence. The way that you moderate that is distance between people. So if you're looking at the difference in a greeting between we're right here versus we're across the room from each other, that's how you would define it functionally across formal characteristics. So there is a situation where the greeting of, hey, how are you, is appropriate. And there's a situation where the greeting is, hey, I'm over here, is appropriate. those are formally two different behaviors, right? The decibel level is different, but functionally they are equivalent. I got the attention, or I was heard by the person who I was attempting to interact with. So while there is more gray area in that functional definition, the bounds are more socially significant.
So in that definition though, should, like how I just said, like in a way for the other person to hear them, but should I say also like from 3 feet apart, from 10 feet apart, like make sure to include something like that in the definition as well?
Absolutely.
Like how far apart they are?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where you can you can start to affect the formal definition through a functional definition, right? So instead of
That is going to be a
saying
long program sheet for one STO.
instead of saying X number of decibels, you can say can be heard from 10 feet away.
Okay.
Up to 10 feet away, right? Now, what that does well for this one behavior is it puts a floor on what the acceptable response is. I can be 4 feet away and I can yell at someone and they will hear me, but that's not an acceptable response. So you would have to find a way to functionally define a ceiling, and that would be where your challenge is, right? And you can to some degree have a gray functional definition in a way that does not cause a listener to be startled. Like if someone speaks too loudly in your face, you're kind of going like that. That's again measured functionally, right? It's obviously too loud, but it doesn't do you any good if the person I'm greeting is across the room and I've taught my child to speak in that range, because then they won't be heard from across the room. So they need to learn how far their voice carries, but also that when I speak too loud, I still don't get a response. What we're talking about here is jumping, I don't want to say jumping ahead, but a little preview into what you guys are going to be studying next year when we start talking about verbal behavior. All right. Verbal behavior is behavior that is mediated by a listener. So what we're talking about here is behavior that is formally defined by its function on a listener. If I behave in such a way that the listener will respond to me, then eye contact reinforcement. If I say, I get, what? I didn't hear you, which is not, I said, hey, how are you? Which is not the reinforcer for, hi, how are you? The reinforcer for, hi, how are you is, I'm doing well, how are you? Right? Conversely, if I say, hey, how are you? Right? And my listener goes, whoa, that's too loud. That's also not, I'm doing fine, how are you? So when the behavior of that listener functions as a reinforcer for your own behavior, that's verbal behavior. You see what I'm saying? Does everyone see what I'm saying there? So in that situation, I can formally and operationally define that based on the effect on a listener. And that's a more, so like I said, that's a more socially significant way of looking at that type of behavior.
So is that, I'm sorry if this is dumb, I'm just trying to understand, but like, so the way that like, let's say that was my student and the way that he would learn, if I said, hey, how are you? Really loud. And like, I'm right next to him, like the way he would know that that's inappropriate would just be from like my reactions to it, basically. Like, is that what you're saying? Like, would that be the best way to teach him that, just from the effect it has on me?
So the answer is yes, if.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
The if
It's
is,
so much.
yeah, well, welcome to behavior analysis. The if is if your response or you are a condition reinforcer.
Okay.
So if that social interaction functions as a reinforcer for him, then yes, that would be appropriate. If he doesn't care about you or care how you respond, and his only reinforcer is, did I do it right? Great, give me my M&M. Then no, he's not going to care. What's going to matter is, does he get the M&M?
Okay.
So social behavior should be reinforced by social reinforcers. Otherwise, and this is one of the things that I was going to get to with your data itself, otherwise it's not going to generalize unless the reinforcer is there.
Mhm.
Right? So if you are using tokens and prosthetics and edibles and toys and whatever, all these things to reinforce this type of behavior in your intervention, we would expect one of two things. Either it does not maintain because a novel person doesn't have a token board or an M&M or an iPad or whatever that signals, if I do this to this person who has this thing, then I get the thing, right? So we wouldn't expect it. Or if we do see it in the absence of those other stimuli, then we will have seen that the interaction will have become conditioned. Or third option is that the correction is aversive and they're trying to avoid the correction. But most likely one of the first two. All right.
That makes sense. Yes, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
So when you have the, I love what you did there. There's a million different ways that we could continue to discuss how to look at that type of project. But what I love about what you did is it takes something simple and basic. You have task analysis, you have some shaping, you have some positive reinforcement, you have all these really simple things. You're putting them together to create a tactic. You're implementing that tactic and you're seeing what happens. And what happens is should not be right now for us as this class, should not be defined by success or failure of the post probe, but rather our ability to understand, excuse me, our ability to understand why we saw what we saw. Right? That's what we're looking for right now. When we get to a, next year in all the classes that you guys are going to take, we want to be able to understand what we will see before we do it, and therefore we really are looking for positive effects. But right now, if we see drop-offs, the bigger question is, do we understand why? Can we understand what we missed in the procedure? Why not? Maybe not even what we missed in the procedure, but why what I thought was going to be a generalized behavior goes away. Well, because I used FR1 with edibles to maintain the social behavior, and Jim the janitor didn't have any M&Ms, so of course he wasn't going to talk to him, right? And that's why I think your idea of bringing in a random person, like that was perfect. It was out of convenience, but that's totally perfect, right? So any presentation that you guys give is going to open up so many different avenues for us to talk about. Here we are an hour later, and we're still on one presentation. But that's what you guys need, and that's what this is about. So really, really, really good job. Awesome job, Lauren. I'm really proud of you. Taylor, is appropriate volume and component of audience control. Yeah, absolutely, right? You are, that is the class of behaviors that are functionally defined by appropriate setting, right? Or behaving appropriately within the setting. So that would absolutely fall into that. All right. Does anyone else want to brave a presentation? Someone can do it.
I can present if nobody else wants to, but I'd prefer to wait. I don't know if you got my email.
I did, and I don't want to push you.
I'm fine if I'm okay right now, but if anybody else can go, I can wait a week.
Anyone else going to bail Heather out? You want to give it a shot, Heather?
I can. I have it pulled up. I don't have any mentor feedback on my data collection, but
okay.
I have data.
That's okay.
Sorry if y'all hear yelling in the back. My child is playing with the dog. Okay, so do I just share my whole thing, or do I just do kind of like Lauren did and go?
Either way. Why don't you kind of do what Lauren did and talk through your lit review and the first part of your methods, and then when we get to the back half of your methods, we'll put up the graphs. Really quickly, one more thing before you start. One of the things that I really want you guys to understand right now is you're getting feedback from your mentor, as you get feedback from us, kind of knowing where you guys are, is the data collection process is a massive shaping process. All right. Just because, how do I want to say this? Just because you do or don't get feedback on one or another area, assume that there is feedback to be given on everything. All right. Unless we explicitly say in a given section or paragraph or whatever, like, yes, you nailed this, assume that everything is to continue to be shaped. When we give our feedback for these data collections, just like with the research summaries, we target specific areas that we are looking at. And over time, we hit all the different components of the data collection, such that by the time you graduate, you have this really robust paper. All right. When you get feedback from your mentor, when you get feedback from us, even if it's great, and even if your grade is great and you're happy with that, don't stop there. As you read papers, as you listen to each other, as you listen to us, always be thinking about how you can improve your writing, how you can incorporate new information, how you can extend your own writing ability as the next year to year and a half go on. Okay, so that's something to think. As we give feedback to you guys here, already be incorporating that into your current writing. As you hear each other talk, oh, I really like how this person spoke about that. I want to try that here. Oh, that reminds me of what I read up here. I want to try that here. All of this, this is the immersive learning process. This is where you guys become good writers and presenters based on what you hear from each other. Okay? Heather, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna give this a shot. So this is my first data collection on the Learn Unit. What I did was increase Learn Unit presentation to try to decrease vocal stereotypy in the therapy setting. His vocal stereotypy is very not so much interrupting, but it does function as a main reinforcer for him. So finding other reinforcers to take the place of that has been a little bit difficult. But I'm gonna go through my abstract and then a little bit of my lit review. I did catch an error on my lit review for myself, so I have to go back and fix that. So the purpose of the study was to test the effect of increasing the presentation of learn units on vocal stereotypy. The study was done on a 6-year-old male who had a diagnosis of ASD, and his level of verbal behavior was identified as having all the pre-verbal foundational cusp, and he's currently working on acquiring the joining of listener and speaker capabilities. He does have most listener pieces components, but his speaker behavior is a little bit lower. He does have some full sentence commands, but it's not consistent. The center he is currently in, he's in a therapy room with one other child because of COVID restrictions. We only have 1 to 2 kids per classroom at this time. And he's in a CABAS model center, and he is currently using the LCAR for his instruction. Because of high rates of problem behavior admitted by the participant, his daily learn unit delivery totals were very low, as well as the total number of objectives met weekly for him. This was before I started working with him. I started working with him at the beginning of December, and his learn unit presentation was below 100 a day. And I'll kind of go on to what I've been doing. I did baseline across a 5-day period, then an intervention to increase his learn units. And I used a reversal design just to kind of see if reducing the learn units each day would have an effect on, like, I didn't completely take away the learn units we were doing, but the protocol we were using had a lot of learn units added to the day. I use intensive tact as well as Edmark, and I just took those out for a week. And then we put it back in to kind of see. The lit review, I did some search on literature for the learn unit itself. I used a lot of Greer, and it just talks about the 4-term contingency between the teacher and the student and how they're interchangeable units of measure. The error that I caught, I did not put anything about stereotypy in there. So I'm going to go back and add that. But I did add some stuff from Greer on motivating operations, which there are situations or changes in the environment that impact the learn unit and are available during deprivation of a reinforcer, which is a big issue with this client. Without a motivating operation in place, many times it's really hard to get his attention, which is without motivating operations, you don't have a learn unit. Give me a second. We have had to create situations to where we're manipulating things in his environment to establish those operations, because you have to be very novel with him to keep his attention. He is very all over the place all the time, so you have to have a lot of energy in your session with him. I don't know how much in detail you want me to go into my lit review.
You're doing great.
Okay. I used an article on Greer and McDonald. It stated measuring as the most valid measure of instruction, the learn unit can be used to analyze learning difficulties and offers tactics to help with instructional problems. A lot of the stuff that I did use, it talks about how the learn unit is so important to their instruction. And for him, the results did show that the learn unit did reduce some of his behaviors.
Good. So really quick, what the way that you just described that, and Lauren, you see how Heather said that relative to what I was talking about before, like, here's what they did, here was the significance, here's how it applied to what I'm looking at, and just like boom, 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 and you're off. That's great.
In addition to the learn units, I also did look a little bit at his learn units criterion. I didn't post that data in here. It's in some of my stuff for Dr. Cohen's class, but learning use criterion is another way to analyze the student's learning repertoire and the effectiveness of teaching. So adding those learn units to his day also increased the opportunities he had to meet objectives that helped reduce some of his learn use criterion as well. Can I share my graph now and talk about my dependent variable? I don't know if I have to ask permission or.
You're good. You can share it.
All right. Okay, my dependent variable was the percentage of intervals of vocal stereotypy, and I defined his vocal stereotypy as repetitive scripts, sounds, and utterances of sound that were not a possible response to a demand situation or a learn unit. So although sometimes he did have those within a learn unit, it would be marked as a minus, but the occurrences of that was during free time and times that we were not presenting learn units. The independent variable was the use of intensive TAC protocol, EdMark, and other LCAR objectives to increase learn unit delivery with a participant with ASD. Intensive TAC protocol was the use of learn unit delivery with social reinforcement as a consequence component of the learn unit, and EdMark is a reading curriculum of direct instruction, and the LCAR is the curriculum that we used specifically in the center for a majority of our clients. We also started using some AIL objectives, but it's just, we're starting to probe it with him. It's not, we haven't really gotten into detail with it. And then here is my results. This is the learn unit totals. As you can see, it's really not where I wanted it to be as far as increasing, but the average overall did increase. So I had 2 baseline phases and then 2 intervention phases. And then his palalia, which was the vocal stereotypy, data is here. Like I said, according to this, I really couldn't see a difference, but whenever I averaged it across a few days, there was a change in my results. I put the range and then I put the average presented daily. So in baseline phase A, across 5 days, he averaged 180.4 presented daily. And then intervention phase A, he went up to 197. And then baseline phase B, it was back down to 189. And then intervention phase B, it was up to 196. So about 15, I guess you can say, more a day average. I really wanted it to be more. But before I started working with him, like I said, his average was below 100 a day. And we're up to, like, currently we're up to about 350.
So I think, you don't by any chance have any behavior data from before you started working with him, do you?
Not currently on me, but I can get that if you want.
Those data might be a more accurate representation of your intervention, right?
In the future though, like I want to present on the learn unit, not the learn unit, intensive TACT. I currently left it in because after this, I was able to discuss with the BCBA that social reinforcement does not function as a reinforcer for him. So we re-implemented it as to try to increase that social reinforcement piece. The reinforcer of tacting is just kind of labeling. He's not tacting, which I learned that from you a couple weeks ago. But and I was like, okay, light bulb. Yep. So overall, his average palalia did go down some. It went down about 5% average across 5 days. And we have tried to keep in as many learn unit presentations a day as possible. But whenever he does switch line technicians, he is a little bit difficult to gain instructional control with. So his learn unit presentations do go down quite a bit whenever we have to switch out line techs. Anything else? Do I need limitations, I guess. I think I put that in here. Yeah, the limitations included time away from the therapy setting during breaks for holidays, as well as illnesses, changing in register line technicians, setting events throughout the time of the intervention, and increases in other behaviors, resulting in learning at presentations for some days being a little lower. And then setting events for him could include more or less individuals within the therapy room, changes in his daily schedule, and other small changes in the therapy setting, which we're currently working on the rigidity of his schedules and stuff. Okay. I think that's it though.
All right. Very good. Very good. Comments, questions, thoughts? Lay it on.
Okay, Heather,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so you were saying that his stereotypy is basically like his reinforcer.
Yes.
How do you break that? Because I got one just like it. And like, I'm trying every other type of reinforcer, but there is none as great as his own.
It's been very difficult. Like I said, I've only seen a very small decrease in the 3 months that I've been working with him almost every day. But I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Stereotypy is very difficult to break, especially whenever they have instructional history for so long of that being their only reinforcer. Because this specific client, he'll go all day without eating. Like food is not a reinforcer for him. He will starve himself. But it's just finding little things here and there that I can go longer periods of time that'll help him, I guess. I don't know, he really likes to play and run and move. And if I can keep him, we've tried, I don't know. Dr. Shannon might have a better answer because I haven't worked with
What does
any
his
clients with
stereotypy look like?
his vocal stereotypy is just a lot of non-functional words, and he also has physical stereotypy, and he uses items as like, I don't know.
Mine takes his pencil and does this, and he does this like constantly while we're trying to write. And I'm like, no, pencil's for writing, And every time I have to give him the pencil to write, this is what he's doing. And I'm like, oh my God, no.
Have you tried any type of response block for that? I mean, I feel like that would be a little bit easier to response block because it's more of a, I don't know. I'm new to the stereotypy thing. And I haven't really worked with a lot of lower level clients that have high rates of stereotypy like this guy does.
What do you guys think? What are some thoughts? I know all of you deal with somebody that emits stereotypy. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. But what do you guys think?
What does the verbal behavior look like that the vocal verbal behavior look like that he does have? That's not vocal stereotypy. Like, is there does he have functional speech or?
Yeah, he emits man's tax, interverbals. His mans are very minimal. He does what he can to get whatever he wants. He has a lot of additional behaviors on top of that because he has an instructional history of getting, like, he has a behavior chain that he goes through to access everything.
Because we've had a student that part of their behavior plan for vocal stereotypy was interrupting it using interverbal programs. So just running, what color is your shirt? What color is it? So that way they have to break the vocal stereotypy to answer correctly or just emit an answer of sorts. I don't know how well that would work, but I mean, that's just one thing we've done was implement some sort of interverbal, or like you already said, you have intensive tacting in.
Yeah,
We didn't
the
do intensive
additional
tacting because social praise in itself, it was it was just words to him. It's not that it was aversive, but it wasn't that it was entirely reinforcing in itself.
The additional LTAR objectives we put in were mostly interverbal responses to increase those responses for him. The problem is after a few, he's like, no questions, and then he shuts down. So it's just kind of been a off and on battle of you really have to be, I have to throw different types of antecedents in there because if not, after 2 or 3 of each one, he's done. Like, no more. And he'll tell you, like, he'll put his hand up and he's like, no more questions.
So I'm guessing
wow.
he can man termination pretty well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much. Emily's laughing because she hears him down the hall.
So stereotypy and vocal stereotypy in general is kind of like the thorn in our side as a field. We know that our principals can elicit control over stereotypy, over vocal stereotypy. We know that we can replace it. We know we can do all of those things, but all of the kind of standard procedures that would get us there don't seem right. Like we can't block it, we can't replace it, we can't shove food in their mouth, we can't, there's all these things. We can't force a prompt for a replacement behavior. There's all these issues that are our go-to toolbox works but doesn't, and we struggle with that, and I've struggled with that. There is some really good work coming out that's been out for the last couple of years that starts to look at stereotypy in a new way, and it's a way that a lot of us have wanted to think about stereotypy for a long time, but we kind of just didn't know if it was okay. And the first thing that we have to understand about stereotypy is it is a behavior that is governed by reinforcement. That reinforcement is just like any other reinforcement. All right. What that means is it is managed by conditions of deprivation and satiation. So the more we are trying to block access to vocal stereotypy, we're placing it under deprivation, which means the child is going to behave in a higher magnitude, in order to access that vocal stereotypy. All right. The more they have access to it, the less it's going to function as a reinforcer, the sooner we are going to be able to, or be able to interrupt it in some way, shape, or form. We've kind of been in this mindset that the only good stereotypy is no stereotypy. And the only way to completely prevent stereotypy, you have to have 2 things. You have to have a large community of reinforcers, and you have to have audience control. And with that audience control, you always have to be around somebody. How many of you emit stereotypy? I crack my knuckles. I pick at my beard. I go like this a bunch. We all do all sorts of things. So stereotypy in and of itself is not a maladaptive behavior. We have to stop looking at it that way. Where it's challenging is that it is this pervasive behavior, but what's happening in those situations where a child is emitting high magnitude or intensity behavior to access stereotypy is we are not providing other reinforcers. You cannot tell me that the child who is alive at age 7 has no other reinforcers. Now, that's not to say they don't have a limited community of reinforcers, but has no other reinforcers. The problem is when we're blocking stereotypy to try and insert these other reinforcers, we're putting that stereotypy on deprivation so that, and they're going to want to access it more and more and more, and for longer and longer and longer periods. So having these opportunities to non-contingently access stereotypy, if they know that when they're around us, their behavioral thought process is, I better get this whenever I can, however I can, because they're going to try and stop me from doing it. But if they can always access it, then you don't have to escape from other things because you can access stereotypy whenever. So I don't have to always do it because when I really need it, I can access it. So if I'm not trying to be blocked, if I'm not trying to be interrupted, if I'm not trying to gain access to it all the time, maybe I'll stop and I'll listen to you. Now that's a simple way of looking at it in an applied way. It's very challenging to do because we're not very good at looking at incremental behavior change, even though that's what we are supposed to be really, really good at, right? Heather, when you said his palilalia decreased by 5%, you tell that to anybody other than a behavior analyst, and they'll be like, so what? That's from 20 times a minute down to 19 times a minute. That's 5%. A behavior analyst should say, all right, now let's get 5% more. Okay? So being able to look at behavior in that way is going to really change how we can do things. Now, your ability to go from 80 learning units a day to 180 learning units a day to 200 learning units a day to 350 learning units a day, as long as it's learned. Now, you said there was some issue with social praise functioning as a reinforcer, and we have to dig deeper into that. But if we can get that, and the more that those, I'm going to call them opportunities, become learn units, then the more we're conditioning, because learn units are conditioning, right? So just by getting that many more reinforcers, we're teaching new things, we're conditioning new things. Now we're conditioning new reinforcers. Now there's less need to fall back onto stereotypy and palilalia. We do that when we have to, not necessarily when we want to. Okay? So stereotypy is, and vocal stereotypy in particular, is very challenging. There is no question whatsoever. But we have the basic science when applied, I don't want to say creatively, but I do want to say appropriately, doesn't have to be altered for stereotypy. We just have to understand that it's going to look different for this behavior that we can't block access to. It's not going to behave differently, but it's going to look different. All right, cool. And all sorts of other things that I wanted to say relative to your presentation, which I really, really liked, but I can't remember most of them. One of the things that I want you to consider, when you said you went from 180 to 200 learn units, and I was interested in how to talk about that point, but then you talked about how you got you started at 80 and now you're up to 350. So now you kind of took like a snapshot in the bigger picture, right? You know, that 80 to 350, back down to 80, back up to 350, that's what we would really want to measure. There is a lot of research, or there's some research being done right now out of Teachers College that's actually looking at exactly that, and actually looking at it specifically with intensive tact, where their question was, okay, we know that 100 learning units a day gets X result. What if we only do 50 learning units a day? Do we get X? Do we get X divided by 2? Do we get 2X for some reason? Can we maintain that level of success with fewer learning units? And he's specifically looking at intensive tact. So that's really cool. Now for those kids, social attention has to function as a reinforcer, because that's the reinforcer, right? But that is something that you want to look at. Your question was effectively, does 20 learning units a day help? And you could extend it, does 40 learning units a day help? Does 60? Does 80? Does 200? All right. We do have a lot of research that says when you have significant behavior problems, your first tactic should be doubling the number of learning units. If you still have behavior and you're below 400 learning units after you've doubled it, double it again. All right. There's reinforcement in learning. It's our job to identify where learning is occurring.
I think my biggest struggle with him has been, because social reinforcement does function as a reinforcer some days, but other days he doesn't want anything to do with it. So it's more of figuring out the motivating operations of situations to make things reinforcing for him, because he has a lot of stuff in his repertoire, but some days he wants it and some days he doesn't. Like creating that deprivation of things, but doing it in a way that wouldn't make things aversive either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's just I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's hard, and it takes a lot of second level decision making, and comfort with more tactics than we as a group here are ready to be comfortable with, and that's okay, and that comes with time, for sure. All right, cool. Thoughts, questions, anything else?
Yeah, Dr. Shaman, I was, I don't know, this thought occurred to me when you were talking about the research being done at Teachers College. Are they, I mean, can it be equated to like the quality of the learn unit is what is effective, or?
No, so what they're treating it like is basically like a dosage of Advil. Like we're doing this study, we know that 4 Advil a day is effective in decreasing headaches. Can we do it with 2 Advil?
Okay.
We got 2 Advil. Can we get the same effect with 1 Advil? No. Okay. 2 Advil is our sweet spot, right? So that in that particular sense, that's how they're looking at it. Now, what you're talking about, that's something that I'm beyond interested in doing. I want to. If I could draw up one study, it would be analyzing the different component, doing like a functional analysis of the different components of the learn unit, and figuring out what are the critical components of the learn unit, because the learn unit as a whole in context is a theory. I'm not sure it's testable. All right. But that like quality of learn unit, I think that concept is huge. How many of you have, you finish a session and you didn't run your best learn units, or you observe someone else and you're like, those are not good learn units right now, right? By the theoretical definition, there's no such thing as a good learn unit and a better learn unit. There's only learn units and not learn units, right? If you're missing the EO, if you don't have an appropriate target, if there's a setting event, if they're missing instructional history, blah, 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 if any of those things are missing, you don't have a learn unit. It's not that it's a bad learn unit, it's that it's not a learn unit, right? But we also live in the gray, you know? We can learn when there are setting events. We compensate for that. We can teach when there are setting events. We can teach through lower reinforcers. We have to compensate in other ways. And maybe that's part of the learning unit, right? But doing an analysis of those components of the learning unit, I think I would love to do that. I don't know how though. Maybe one of you will help me get there. All right, let's go ahead and call it there. Next week is spring break. Take a little time off. But when we come back, it's time to present. Okay, you guys got 2 great models tonight. Let's start putting some things together. I would love to see some PowerPoints. Heather and Lauren, I really appreciate you guys working off your papers. I still recommend that you put those papers into PowerPoint form, and I would be happy to take a look over those slides for you so you can get some feedback on those. But for after spring break, Dr. G, I feel like this is one area where I'm a little nicer than Dr. G. I think you guys know he'll call on you. So everyone kind of anticipate having to present 2 weeks from tonight. And if you're lucky or unlucky enough to called on or not get called on, then you'll present the following week. So let's get those presentations ready. It's not the end of the world. I promise you, we're nice. We love hearing it. This discussion is what we live for. So thank you to everyone who participated tonight. And for those of you who were listening in, hopefully you were able to get something from it as well. All right. Have a good one. And I will see you guys all. I think I have only one more session with you guys when we come back. I close Moodle. So we're there. We're at the end of the semester. All right. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you in a few weeks.